Did David O. McKay, ninth president of the LDS Church, lose his testimony of the Book of Mormon? That's the question we'll be discussing tonight. And believe it or not, there appears to be some evidence to support the idea. Here's the name of tonight's show at Radio Free Mormon, episode 409. Today's date is July 25th, 2025, that I'm recording this. David O. McKay lost his testimony of the Book of Mormon, 3 question marks. This comes from a book that was published 5 years ago in 2020 titled Writing Mormon History. It is a collection of essays by Mormon historians collected and edited by Joseph Geisner. You can see the date there on the slide, 2020. This is what it says in the synopsis on Amazon. Every great book has a great backstory. Here, well-known historians describe their journeys of writing books that have influenced our understanding of the Mormon past, offering an unprecedented glimpse into why they wrote these important works. Writing Mormon History is a must-read for historians, students of history, scholars, and aspiring authors. And the volume's contributors are, and then there's a long list of illustrious names, but the one we're focusing on tonight is Gregory Prince, who most of you know and who probably needs little to no introduction for most of you. So I'm going to make it very quick. Who is Gregory Prince? We have to know who the characters are in this cast, and I'll go through this very quickly so we can get to the point, the amazing and remarkable point of tonight's show. Dr. Greg Prince is a dentist, a pathology researcher, and a Mormon historian, best known for his books, Power from on High, The Development of Mormon Priesthood, David O. McKay and the Rise of Modern Mormonism. I read that book. Actually, I read the first one too. Leonard Arrington and the Writing of Mormon History. I read that one. And Gay Rights and the Mormon Church. I've read that one as well. Here are copies of the covers of all 4 of those books. How are these books received? Well, Greg Prince has won a number of awards for his books. That's how good they are. The McKay book, the one on David O. McKay, was the recipient of 4 prestigious awards, and the Arrington book, the one about Leonard Arrington, received the Evans Biography Award. In 2023, Prince was given the Leonard J. Arrington Award for Lifetime Achievement by the Mormon History Association, the highest award given by that organization. So I'm telling you all this to underscore the fact that Greg Prince is a reliable source of information. If he says something happened, you can take it to the bank. And here's what he says happens in the paper that was published in the Writing Mormon History book that was edited by Joe Geisner. Here's what Greg Prince writes. I interviewed Hugh Nibley in 1995 in his office at BYU. Nibley was probably the preeminent LDS scholar apologist of the 1950s and 1960s. Yes, absolutely, no doubt about Hugh Nibley being the top Mormon apologist during that time period. Popcorn, Greg says, popcorn is a good metaphor for the interview, for he popped from one subject to another, rarely completing one narrative before moving to the next. To get the essence of an important part of the interview, I included verbatim. Quote, I had a talk. This is Hugh Nibley being quoted, by the way, and it's recorded on tape. I had a talk. I don't think I should even tell you about this, Hugh Nibley said. I had a real argument with David O. McKay. No, I won't tell you about it because I have never told anybody about it. What on earth is this talking about? Well, we're going to get to that in just a second, but first we have to describe the additional characters who have now been introduced into the plot, mainly David O. McKay and Hugh Nibley. Once again, people who will need little to no introduction, but I'm going to hit upon it briefly just for completeness' sake. Who was David O. McKay? Born on September 8, 1873, David O. McKay spent his youth in Huntsville, Utah. After completing formal schooling and a mission, he married his college sweetheart, Emma Ray Riggs, in 1901. 5 years later, at the age of 32, he was called as an apostle, beginning a life of service in the church's highest councils. He was sustained as president of the church on April 9, 1951, and after 44 years in the Quorum of the 12 and 19 as church president, he was church president from 1951 to 1970, very early 1970. After 19 years as church president, David O. McKay died on January 18, 1970 in Salt Lake City at the age of 96. That's who David O. McKay is. Now, who was Hugh Nibley? Here's a couple of pictures of Hugh Nibley. Most of you know him. We'll hit this very quickly as well. Hugh Winder Nibley, who lived from 1910 to 2005, was an American scholar and a member of the LDS Church, who was a professor at Brigham Young University for nearly 50 years. He was a prolific author and wrote apologetic works supporting the archaeological, linguistic, and historical claims of Joseph Smith. He was a member of the LDS Church and wrote and lectured on LDS scripture and doctrinal topics, publishing many articles in the LDS Church magazines. So Hugh Nibley was very much a defender of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, and he took every opportunity to put in a good word for the LDS Church and for its founder, Joseph Smith. And here are several of the books that Hugh Nibley wrote. There's Since Cumorah, The Message of the Joseph Smith Papyri, An Egyptian Endowment, An Approach to the Book of Mormon, Lehi in the Desert, and The World of the Jaredites, and Time Vindicates the Prophets, which is actually a weekly radio series that he wrote and delivered. I think it was at KSL back in the 1950s. I got those tapes and listened to all of them more than once. Now, because Hugh Nibley was such a great defender of the faith, FARMS, the Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies, set themselves the task of collecting everything that Hugh Nibley had ever written and putting them between the covers of FARM publications. And here's the long list of books that were published by FARMS that contain all of the writings by Hugh Nibley, many, if not most of them, apologetic in nature. These are the same books, but I broke it down so I could enlarge it a bit so you can see some of the titles. There's Abraham in Egypt. There's One Eternal Round. Of course, right there in the middle, there's that big one, The Message of the Joseph Smith Papyri. And over here on the other side, we have such books as The World and the Prophets. And you can also see there an approach to the Book of Mormon. That's in the FARMS edition. Here's a picture of Hugh Nibley in his later years with a quote from him: "The Book of Mormon can and should be tested. It invites criticism." And all of this introduction on Hugh Nibley is by way of showing you who Hugh Nibley was, and that he would rather cut off his left arm than say anything negative about the LDS Church. And yet, he seems to have done so. We go on now with Greg Prince's article in the book Writing Mormon History. Remember, we had just left it off where Hugh Nibley had told him, "I don't think I should even tell you about this. I had a real argument with David O. McKay. No, I won't tell you about it because I have never told anybody about it." The story goes on, and it goes on this page 216 as well as 217 of the book Writing Mormon History. Here it is, a bit enlarged so I can read it more easily. He then asked me, Hugh Nibley then asked Greg Prince to turn off the recorder, which I did, after which he related a time in the mid-1960s, so David O. McKay is the president, when, upon returning from a trip to Israel to see the Dead Sea Scrolls, Hugh Nibley, made an appointment with David O. McKay. He was excited to tell the president that the scrolls will prove the historicity of the Book of Mormon. And he was shocked when David O. McKay replied, quote, "Well, we already know that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon." He blamed O.C. Tanner, a former LDS educator and very successful businessman, for polluting McKay's mind on the subject, and spent much of the rest of his career, Hugh Nibley did, trying to reinstate the Book of Mormon as an authentic ancient record. So David O. McKay told Hugh Nibley that, well, we already know that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon, and Hugh Nibley was upset about it and blamed this fellow named O.C. Tanner for polluting David O. McKay's mind on the subject. Now, we're going to stop the story once again because now we have a new character introduced. This individual, O.C. Tanner, I had never heard of before, but he's a big, big deal in LDS history as well as in LDS jewelry. Here's a picture of O.C. Tanner. The O.C. does not stand for obsessive compulsive. The O stands for Obert, which was his first name, which is why he uses an initial. It's spelled Obert like Robert without the R. So what kind of guy was O.C. Tanner like? Obert C. Tanner was an entrepreneur, philanthropist, and scholar. He was born on September 22nd, 1904 in Farmington, Utah, to Joseph M. Tanner and his second wife, Annie Clark Tanner. That's how long ago he was born. He was born to a second wife. Tanner earned an LLB degree from the University of Utah, a master's degree from Stanford University, and a Juris Doctor degree, he's a lawyer, from the University of Utah, although he went into business. He was also honored with 7 honorary degrees from most of Utah's universities and colleges. This guy's a smart cat. He first was a seminary instructor in Springville, Utah, and then became a professor of philosophy and religious studies and taught at Stanford and the University of Utah. He held fellowships at Oxford and Cambridge. At Stanford, he was also the acting chaplain. This is a remarkable fellow. I can't believe I'd never heard of him before. And here we have the O.C. Tanner Jewelers in downtown Salt Lake City. That's quite a store. Tanner was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He served a full-time mission to Germany from 1924 to 1927. He authored, co-authored, or edited 10 books, including The New Testament Speaks and Christ's Ideals for Living. He edited A Mormon Mother, an autobiography by Annie Clark Tanner. He co-authored Toward Understanding the New Testament. His autobiography is titled One Man's Journey in Search of Freedom. He died on October 14, 1993. He presided over and directed the growth of his company since its founding. So it's important that we know who this guy, O.C. Tanner, is, because now he's going to figure in the story. Because remember, Hugh Nibley blames O.C. Tanner for polluting David O. McKay's mind into getting David O. McKay to believe that the Book of Mormon is not ancient, but that Joseph Smith wrote it. I found some more relevant information about O.C. Tanner in a paper written by Noel Reynolds, who was a professor at BYU. It came out in 1998. It's titled The Coming Forth of the Book of Mormon in the 20th Century. And here are the relevant parts of this article. Quote, Hugh W. Nibley's candor lifts the veil. This is what Noel Reynolds is writing. Hugh W. Nibley's candor lifts the veil on an even more ominous or insidious dimension of the widespread lack of support for Book of Mormon instruction before 1960. When Nibley first arrived at BYU, he maintained an active connection with the so-called swearing Mormons, a circle of LDS liberal academics who regularly met from 1949 to 1950 to discuss intellectual issues relating to Mormonism in an open environment in which they could speak freely about their views. Many of the swearing elders questioned fundamental beliefs of the LDS faith, and some flatly rejected the Book of Mormon as a divine work. Now, here's a nice little cartoon image of several of the members of the swearing elders, and they have little frames with their names on them. It's not easy to see in the slide, but if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the left, that is O.C. Tanner right there, a member of the swearing elders. Nibley, this is the paper by Noel Reynolds continuing. Nibley tells of being invited to Salt Lake City to talk with them, the swearing elders, about the Book of Mormon. And they'd say, you're among friends now. Now we're quoting Hugh Nibley talking about his experience with O.C. Tanner and the swearing elders. And they'd say, you're among friends now. You can say what you really feel about the Book of Mormon and about anything else. Well then, Hugh says, well then I bore my testimony. And oh, were they mad. They were just boiling. I never saw such anger. They just ripped me. And then going back, O.C. Tanner laid it out about the Book of Mormon. We have to get rid of it. Now, this is Hugh Nibley quoting O.C. Tanner from this meeting at the swearing elders. O.C. Tanner laid it out about the Book of Mormon and said, we have to get rid of it. It's driving the best minds out of the church. You can't see it, but with my training, I know it, he'd say to me. Now, Joseph Smith was a deceiver. Once again, Hugh Nibley quoting O.C. Tanner. Now, Joseph Smith was a deceiver, but he was a sly deceiver. The Book of Mormon is not true. Now, that ends the quote by Hugh Nibley of O.C. Tanner, and then Hugh Nibley concludes, they had a real active hatred of the Book of Mormon up there, even though they were members of the church. And that's from page 36 of Noel Reynolds' paper. So this is how Hugh Nibley knew O.C. Tanner, knew O.C. Tanner's views on the Book of Mormon, that it was not scriptural or authentic or ancient, also knew of O.C. Tanner's friendship with David O. McKay, and therefore blamed O.C. Tanner for polluting David O. McKay's mind about the Book of Mormon and getting David O. McKay to come to the point where, when he's prophet and president of the church in the mid-1960s, believes and says that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon. All right, let's go back to the book Writing Mormon History and Greg Prince's article, where we will conclude the story. We just read the part about Hugh Nibley blamed O.C. Tanner, a former LDS educator and very successful businessman, for polluting McKay's mind on the subject of the Book of Mormon and spent much of the rest of his career trying to reinstate the Book of Mormon as an authentic ancient record. So, if I'm understanding this correctly, Greg Prince has a recording of the second time that Hugh Nibley told this story, which is why it's indented and it's apparently a word-for-word quote from him the second time. Gregory Prince writes, Hugh Nibley, then allowed me to turn on the recorder again, and a few minutes later, this time on the record, he retold the same story, quote, at that particular time, these are the words of Hugh Nibley being quoted by Greg Prince, at that particular time, Brother McKay was under strong pressure from O.C. Tanner, I think, who was his very dear friend. They talked down the Book of Mormon. They didn't only neglect it. Of course, that group up there, the swearing elders apparently, of course, that group up there, they really talked it down. Well, the main thing, as we, Tanner and Nibley, O.C. Tanner and Hugh Nibley, were driving back to the bus station, O.C. Tanner said to me, Hugh Nibley, we've got to get rid of the Book of Mormon. That's why we had this meeting, the swearing elders meeting. It's driving the best minds out of the church. We can't have it anymore. Now, you don't understand this, but me, with my training and my education, I can see all these things. End of quote from O.C. Tanner. And then, Hugh Nibley continuing, and then I, Hugh Nibley, started giving him some arguments. He, Tanner, got so mad he could hardly control himself. We had a time. And I've never told anybody about that. That's the way it was. But I've always admired and loved President McKay. That's why I've never told anybody about it. But he said that, quote, Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon, unquote. That's what Hugh Nibley is telling Gregory Prince. David O. McKay told him in the mid-1960s. Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon. As stunning as that statement is, there may be some corroborating evidence for this story as well, if corroboration is needed. There was a second interview that was done of Hugh Nibley in 1990. Remember, the one by Gregory Prince was done in 1995, but Stan Larson interviewed Hugh Nibley in 1995 years earlier as part of a project by the Marriott Library where Stan Larson worked. Let me tell you a little bit about Stan Larson. Stan Larson received his PhD from the University of Birmingham. He is the author of Quest for the Gold Plates, Thomas Stewart Ferguson's Archaeological Search for the Book of Mormon, as well as editor of several titles, including the Apostolic Diaries of Rutger Clausen and The Truth, the Way, the Life, an elementary treatise on theology, the masterwork of B.H. Roberts. He has also been published in Dialogue, Enzyme, BYU Studies, Sunstone, Journal of Book of Mormon History, and Evangelical Quarterly. He is not shoddy either, Stanley Larson. Stanley Larson was, quote, one of the top LDS intellectuals and former coordinator of the Standard Works translation in the church translation services. He used to work for the church when he was a member. That's from Ins and Outs of Mormonism, page 219. And finally, from the Salt Lake Tribune, 1985, we have this. Dr. Larson, who reads Greek, Latin, Syriac, and Hebrew, compared passages in the Book of Mormon with the King James Version and earliest existing biblical manuscripts. He concluded that because translation errors in the King James Version are mirrored in the Book of Mormon, yeah, he's the guy who did this. Joseph Smith copied passages from the 1769 edition of the KJV Bible rather than ancient plates. So once again, that's from the Salt Lake Tribune, September 28th, 1985, about Dr. Stan Larson's research. And this same Stan Larson interviewed Hugh Nibley back in 1990. Here is the cover page of the transcript of this recorded interview. The recording itself, I believe, is at the University of Utah, but the transcript is available on the internet. This is part of the Everett L. Cooley Oral History Project for the Marriott Library at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. And over there on the right is a picture of Stan Larson. He's a very difficult person to find pictures of on the internet. He has almost no presence on the internet as far as photographs of himself. But now let's look at this interview that he had with Hugh Nibley, and which is also recorded 5 years before Greg Prince interviewed Hugh Nibley, in which Hugh Nibley made that startling admission. So on page 15 of the transcript of this interview, they're talking about characters in the Book of Mormon. And toward the bottom of page 15, Stan Larson asks Hugh Nibley, do you think there's any kind of a legitimate place for a more modern view of the Book of Mormon? that places the value in these characterizations and the moral principles in the book, but lacking any historical. I'm not saying that you're suggesting that, but is it possible that someone could reject the historicity of the Book of Mormon and still, turning the page now, Hugh Nibley interrupts. Oh, they do that all the time, of course, i.e., reject the historicity of the Book of Mormon. Hugh Nibley says, I know general authorities who do that, have done that. They're not living now, who have done that very thing. Stan Larson asks, who was a general authority in the past? Hugh Nibley says, I won't say. Stan Larson says, you won't say? Hugh Nibley says, because he's a very high general authority. Stan Larson asks, has he passed away? Hugh Nibley says, yes, he's passed away. Stan Larson asks, well, would it be safe to recommend his name to us? Hugh Nibley says, no, it would not be safe to recommend his name to you. Stan Larson says, but anyway, there are those that have had that view. Hugh Nibley says he was convinced that the Book of Mormon, this unnamed, very high-ranking, deceased general authority, Hugh Nibley says about him, he was convinced that the Book of Mormon was fiction, a work of pious fiction by Joseph Smith. And Stan Larson says, or non-historical. And then Hugh Nibley says, possibly B. And I'm not sure if that was transcribed correctly or if that's what he said. I don't know what it means, but he goes off on another subject. The astonishing thing is how little we know about anything. And now he's going to go off in this popcorn interview, right? This is also a popcorn type interview, popping from one subject to another. That's the end of that subject. He's done. But what he's told us is remarkable. Hugh Nibley tells Stan Larson of a very high-ranking general authority who is deceased in 1990 when the interview takes place, who believed that the Book of Mormon was fiction. This general authority was so high that he refuses to give the name of the general authority to Stan Larson. And 5 years later, when Hugh Nibley's being interviewed by Greg Prince, he tells the same story, but he gives the name of the general authority as David O. McKay. And you can't get much higher than that, certainly not in the 1960s. So it is possible to see this 1990 interview with Stan Larson as corroborating and buttressing the interview in 1995 by Gregory Prince. Conclusions. Gregory Prince relates an interview with Hugh Nibley in 1995, which he ultimately recorded and quotes verbatim. Prince is a reliable source. 2. Hugh Nibley was a faithful and zealous Mormon apologist, a professor at BYU, and definitely had the ear of church leaders, including David O. McKay. Hugh Nibley is a reliable source, especially since he is recounting something against his interests. Remember, this is why I established that Hugh Nibley was a lifetime defender of the Mormon faith. If there was anything negative about it, such as the president of the church saying that he doesn't believe the Book of Mormon is ancient or scripture, but that Joseph Smith wrote it, he would never say that unless it really happened. Under the law, this is called a statement against interest, and it has sufficient indicia of reliability to be admitted in evidence as an exception to the hearsay rule. This is why the story is so remarkable, because Gregory Prince has absolutely impeccable credentials as a historian and a truth teller, and Hugh Nibley would never have said something negative about the church unless it really happened. It is a statement against his own interests. Now, number 3 in the conclusions. So, weighing the evidence and the credibility of the witnesses, it seems highly likely that David O. McKay, 9th president of the LDS Church, really did believe and say Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon. This conclusion is buttressed by the 1990 Stan Larson interview of Hugh Nibley. And I leave this with a parting question. If the prophet of the LDS Church believed Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon and that it is not an ancient record, is it okay for the Mormon membership to believe the same today? Well, that's the show for tonight. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. I don't know about you, but I had never heard this before, and my mind is absolutely blown away by this information in tonight's episode. If you appreciate what you hear at Radio Free Mormon, please go to radiofreemormon.org, that's .org, and make a donation today. If you can make a continuing monthly recurring donation, $5 a month is all I ask. If you want to give more, that's fantastic. Up to you, whatever you can afford. Your contributions keep Radio Free Mormon broadcasting behind enemy lines. And I'd like to thank all of my listeners who have gone the extra mile and gone to radiofreemormon.org already and made that donation. Thank you so much for your support. Well, that's about all for tonight. Until next time, this is Radio Free Mormon, signing off the air.